I know, I'm back. Me, the broken record. Here's another example of what I'm going to call the limits of wokeness. So, this is one of the two things that have been making headlines over the last few days on social media. This article was published by Compact and it is written by a professor named Vincent Lloyd, who is a Black professor. See here, um, Vincent Lloyd, a Black professor trapped in anti-racist hell. This is Mr. Lloyd, Professor Lloyd's tale of a seminar gone wrong over 6 weeks as the result of a problematic woke activist named Keisha. A name like Keisha always brings back so many high school mean Black girls. Why are the high school mean Black girls always named Keisha? So this is a group of gifted students, I guess, however they define that term. 12 high school students had been chosen by the Telluride Association through a rigorous application process. The acceptance rate is reportedly around 3% to spend 6 weeks together taking college level course, all expenses paid. The group reminded me of the heroes of the Mysterious Benedict Society books I was reading to my daughter. Each teenager brought together for a common project had some extraordinary ability and some quirk. One girl from California spoke and thought at a machine gun speed and started collecting pet snails during the pandemic. Now she had more than 100. A girl from a provincial school in China had never traveled to the United States but had mastered unaccented English and was in love with E.M. Forster. They all lived together and set their own rules. The first few days, the students were actually what you would expect, at turns bubbly, reserved, all of them curious, playful, figuring out how to relate to each other and to the seminar. 4 weeks later, I again sat in front of the gathered students. Now their faces were cold, their eyes down. Since the first week, I had not spotted one smile. Their number was reduced by 2. The previous week, they had voted 2 classmates out of the house, and I was next. Each student read from a prepared statement about how the seminar perpetuated anti-Black violence in its content and form, and how the Black students had been harmed, how I was guilty of countless microaggressions, including through my body language, and how students didn't feel safe because I didn't immediately correct views that failed to treat anti-Blackness as the cause of all the world's ills.
Please put these little kids in cuffs, y'all. Audience, no photos, please.
Why are you in riot gear? We don't see no riot here. Come on, y'all. Here come Wizard Kelly and his goons. P, stand your ground. Why are you in riot gear? We don't see no not intimidate us.
Barry, don't just stand there. Do something.
Let's go.
They're gonna arrest our baby. Do something with your white privilege.
Christian A. Smith.
This might just be another lament about woke culture and the loss of traditional educational virtues, but the seminar topic was race and the limits of law in America. 4 of the 6 weeks were focused on anti-Black racism. The other 2 were on anti-immigrant and anti-Indigenous racism. I'm a Black professor. I directed my university's Black Studies program. I lead anti-racism and transformative justice workshops, and I have published books on anti-Black racism and prison abolition. I live in a predominantly Black neighborhood of Philadelphia. My daughter went to an Afrocentric school, and I am on the board of our local Black cultural organization. Man. Like all others on the left, I have been dismissive of criticism of the current discourse on race in the United States. But now my thoughts turn to that moment in the 1970s when leftist organizations imploded, the need to match and raise the militancy of one's comrades leading to a toxic culture filled with dogmatism and disillusion. How did this happen to a group of bright-eyed high school students? So, before I go on, this right here is really the gist of the article. a Black professor himself, very much on the left when it comes to things like anti-racism, CRT, and that kind of stuff. Here he's listing off his credentials, his credibility, and despite all of this, he will find himself on the wrong side of this movement. Because like he said right here, in the 1970s, leftist organizations imploded and became militant. So this is just messed up. This is just messed up, but here goes. Really, he talks about the association, what it was there for. In the wake of George Floyd protests, a group of Black Telluride alumni pressured the association to examine the racism that they claim was baked into the organization culture. So this is the general gist of woke ideologies. See the 1619 Project, critical race theory, Black Lives Matter. The idea there is that Western society, really the United States, was built on white male patriarchy and is fundamentally incongruent with accepting those who are not white male patriarchy.
This country was built on slavery, which means slaves built this country. Tilled this land from sea to sea to sea. First there was rice, tobacco, sugar cane. Then Whitney did his thing and cotton became king. And we were its soldiers, 4 million strong, fighting for America's freedoms, even though we remained America's slaves. Built this country.
So now Telluride would now only offer critical Black studies and anti-oppressive studies seminars. So, they changed the name of what he was teaching. The former would seek to focus more specifically on the needs and interests of Black students. Who are these Black students? Race and the Limits of Law would be classed with the latter. So that's the book he wrote. So here the language changes, critical Black studies and anti-oppressive studies. Again, critical race theory. This is the framing where basically, because they deem the system to be white supremacists, those who are not deemed to be white are deemed to be oppressed by the system. So now it's from, they've gone from actually studying issues, but to actually just branding everything as oppressive, or more specifically anti-oppressive. So Cornell University. At the Cornell location, students live in the same house while participating in 2 different seminars. In 2014, participants in the 2 seminar groups lived their lives together seamlessly outside of the seminar, exploring Ithaca and the Cornell campus, eating and laughing together, and setting up a system to govern their community together. In 2022, however, I was told that the critical Black studies students would live and learn separately, creating a fully Black space. My anti-oppressive studies students were separated from them. Instead of participating in a summer community of 32 high school students, my group was to be a community of 12 that would dwindle to 9 by the time of the mutiny. So he says, furthermore, in 2022, community afternoons and evenings would no longer be spent having fun and doing homework. 2 college-age students called factotums, led by one I will call Keisha. I bet that's her real name. This Keisha, I bet that's her real name. It would be funny if that was her name. But I feel as if, even if this is not her real name, Keisha is such a justified name for this person, because this is like the attitude of just about every Keisha I have ever met in my life. But here is Keisha the toxic. Keisha were assigned to create anti-racism workshops to fill the afternoons. There were workshops on white supremacy, on privilege, on African independence movements, on the thought and activism of Angela Davis, who, by the way, I saw spoke when I was in my last year of university, and more, all of which followed an initial day-long workshop on transformative justice. Students described the workshops as emotionally draining, forcing the high schoolers to confront tough issues and to be challenged in ways they had never been challenged before. I am no stranger to anti-racism workshops. I have participated in many of them, and I have facilitated them myself. But the Telluride workshops were being organized by 2 college-age students filled with the spirit of the times. Basically very woke. From what I gleaned, they involve crudely conveying certain dogmatic assertions, no matter what the topic the workshops were ostensibly about. So here were their dogmatic principles. Experiencing hardship conveys authority. Basically, if you are deemed to be oppressed and marginalized, that gives you authority over all issues pertaining to oppression and marginality. Basically, race, gender, class, and all those things. You get to speak with authority on it. This is the part where, if you're white, stay back because a Black woman is speaking. There is no hierarchy of oppressions except for anti-Black oppression, which is a class of its own. Trust Black women because it's Black women who seem to be leading this movement. Prison is never the answer. Of course not. Let's free them all. Black people need Black space. Okay, I know I call my channel the Ebon Space, but God, that's just a creative term. I don't need Black space, whatever the fuck that means. Allyship is usually performative. Okay, that I can agree with. Nothing worse than woke white liberals claiming to be an ally. I find them annoying. All non-Black people and many Black people are guilty of anti-Black racism. Well, it depends. I don't, that's a little bit more, that requires a little more nuance to go into. There is no way out of anti-Blackness. That is the trap and bind. You can't get out. You can't get out. You can never get out. What is this from? Okay, separate video. Okay, so Professor Lloyd goes into, what a seminar is. It's slow. It's about discussion. It's about, different viewpoints coming together and challenging ideas. Then he goes on to add, if the seminar is slow food, the anti-racist workshop put on by college-age students is a sugar rush. All the hashtags are there, condensed, packaged, and delivered from a place of authority. Yep, hence the authoritarian angle. You do as I say, you repeat what I tell you, and you shut up about it. The worst sort of anti-racist workshop simply offers a new language for participants to echo, to retweet out loud. It's all about hashtags, baby. It's all about hashtags. So I'm skipping ahead with this article because it's very long, although if you get a chance to read it, you should read it because it's so bizarre and absurd. That a woke professor was out woke by an aggressive student named Keisha. But I really want to get to Keisha right now. So in the 2022 anti-racism workshops, the non-Black students learned that they needed to center Black voices and to shut up. Yeah, Keisha reported that this was particularly difficult for the Asian American students, but they were working on it. Eventually, 2 of the Asian American students would be expelled from the program for reasons that, Keisha said, couldn't be shared with me. Of course not. The effects on the seminar were quick and dramatic. During the first week, participation was as you would expect. There were 2 or 3 shy students who only spoke in partner or small group work, 2 or 3 outspoken students, and the rest in the middle. 1 of the Black students was outspoken, 1 was in the middle, 1 was shy. By the second week of the seminar, the 2 white students were effectively silent. 2 of the Asian American students remained active, the ones who would soon be expelled. But of course, they were being subversive. They remain active. That's not a good sign that they're not learning their place. But the vast majority of interventions were from the 3 Black students. The 2 queer students, 1 Asian and 1 white, were entirely silent. The Black students certainly had interesting things to say and important connections to make with their experience and those of their family members. But seminar succeeds when multiple perspectives clash into each other, grapple with each other, and develop, and that became impossible. Okay, so, Professor Lloyd here, because he's one of the proponents of transformative justice, here he's trying to explain how it went from the original purpose and meaning to something else entirely under the umbrella of anti-racism or, critical race theory. So in their transformative justice workshop, my students learned to name harms. This language and the framework it expresses come out of the prison abolition movement. Instead of matching crimes with punishments, abolitionists encourage us to think about harms and how they can be made right, often through inviting a broader community to discern the impact of harms, the reasons they came about, and paths forward. In the language of the anti-racism workshop, so this is the new version of this, a harm becomes anything that makes you feel not quite right. For a 17-year-old at a highly selective, all expenses paid summer program, newly empowered with the language of harm, there are relatively few sites at which to use this framework. My seminar became the site at which to try it out and weaponize it, this language.
Well, you understand love, don't you? No, I do not understand anything about white fragility. White fragility? What's that supposed to mean? You know what it means. You're doing it right now. Doing what? Being defensive about race.
Yeah. So basically, words are violence, not actual violence. No, actual violence is still violence, but so now are words. So what we understand as harms or violence is now broader. It's now anything that hurts your feelings is violence. Anything at all. So now we get to the nitty-gritty of why these two Asian American students would be expelled from the program. During our discussion of incarceration, an Asian American student cited federal inmate demographics. About 60% of those incarcerated are white. The Black students said they were harmed. They had learned in one of their workshops that objective facts are a tool of white supremacy. Outside of the seminar, I was told the Black students had to devote a great deal of time to making right the harm that was inflicted on them by hearing prison statistics that were not about Blacks. How dare you not center Blacks and point out that the majority of people incarcerated are white? That is racist. 2 + 2 = 4 is racist, because it is a way for you to dismiss the lived experiences of those who are the number one victims of an oppressive white supremacist society, Black people. You need to center that. How dare you? How dare you use stats, use facts? Don't you know that objective facts are a tool of white supremacy? A few days later, the Asian American student was expelled from the program. Similarly, after a week, facts are racist. After a week focused on the horrific violence, death, and dispossession inflicted on Native Americans, Keisha reported to me that the Black students and their allies were harmed because we hadn't focused sufficiently on anti-Blackness. When I tried to explain that we had 4 weeks focused on anti-Blackness coming soon, as indicated on the syllabus, she said the harm was urgent. It needed to be addressed immediately. Oh, dear God. Oh, dear God. Keisha. It's about being Black. So here he cites John McWhorter, asserts that anti-racism is a new religion. It was an idea I quickly dismissed. Coming around, Professor Lloyd, are you coming around to John McWhorter? Last summer, I found anti-racism to be a perversion of religion. I found a cult from wild, wild country to the NXIVM shows, the Scientology expose. The features of cults have become familiar in popular culture. There is sleep deprivation. Ties to the outside world are severed. The sense of time collapses, with everything cult-related feeling extremely urgent. Participants are emotionally battered. In this weakened state, participants learned about and cling to dogmatic beliefs. Any outsider becomes a threat. Okay, I agree with this. I think it's more of a cult. Wokeness is a cult. I agree with this. I said, I've always said wokeness is the equivalent of MAGA. Both are extreme cults. Not so much a religion. It's only a religion insofar that you're not supposed to question it. You're just supposed to believe and accept. The dozen participants in this summer program were spending almost every hour of every day together. I was almost the only outsider they were encountering, and I was marked as a threat. The feature of a cult that seems to be missing from this story is a charismatic leader, enforcing the separation of followers from the world, creating emotional vulnerability, and implanting dogma. Enter Keisha. Keisha, can you hear me? A recent graduate of an Ivy League university. Dear God. Mentored by a television celebrity Black intellectual. I wonder who this is. I'm curious. Keisha introduced herself as a Black woman who grew up poor and housing vulnerable. Okay. Whose grandmother's limbs had been broken by white supremacists and who had just spent 4 years of college teaching in prisons and advocating for prison abolition. Okay, the grandmother's limbs being broken. I don't know if that's true or not, because again, it could be anything. She told the class that she had majored in Black studies, of course, and had been nurtured by Black feminists, though her famous mentor is a man. and she was planning to devote her life to transforming the academy in the direction of Black justice. Keisha was tasked by Telluride with serving as teaching assistant in my class and organizing workshops for the students in the afternoon. See, this is why I blame these white liberal-run institutions. I bet Telluride is run by white liberals. They are the ones who keep empowering people like this. They're the ones who give them platforms. See Dr. Shola, see, Joy Reid, see all these people. They're being empowered by these white liberal institutions who give them a lot of unearned power and then don't check them out of fear of, being accused of racism. I welcomed Keisha into the class, suggesting that we find some days when she could lead discussion or share her own research. Instead, she largely remained silent during the class for the first 3 weeks, counter-programming the seminar in the afternoons. During a week on the racist background of the U.S. immigration system, Keisha found one of her texts, the foundational Asian American memoir, Nisi Daughter, insufficiently radical, so she lectured to the students that afternoon about the supposed more radical Yuri Kochiyama. Keisha was frustrated that her week on incarceration began with George Jackson and not a Black feminist, so she lectured on Angela Davis that afternoon. I talked at length with both Keisha and the class about learning unfolding over time, about the need to wrestle with an idea before moving on to the next one, and about the overall direction of the course. But for her, and soon for the students, everything had to happen now. Keisha and I were supposedly to meet weekly, but she told me she couldn't schedule in advance, and she would let me know when she had availability. She never did. But Keisha did find time to intervene when a student was harmed. During one class, when we discussed Brown versus Board of Education, my co-instructor explained that the doll test that provided a psychological basis for the Supreme Court's decision. It involved showing children black and white dolls and asking what language they would use to describe them, colored, white, or Negro. During the seminar break, a student had reported this to Keisha, and she rushed in to tell us that a student had been harmed by hearing the word Negro. Oh, dear God. The fourth week of the seminar, this should be made into a movie. It will be called The Horrors of Keisha. The Horrors of Keisha, the fourth week of the seminar, examined theories of anti-Blackness. It should have been predictable that the seminar would blow up during that week. Since the first days of the seminar, Keisha had been talking about how anti-Blackness is qualitatively worse than every other form of oppression. Of course, so it made sense she would want us to be stuck on that week, unable to move forward, leaving anti-Blackness as the course's climax and nadir. It happened that on the last day of the anti-Blackness week, I had invited the students over to my home, where we would talk for a couple hours about the reading and then share a meal. By the time the students' faces were perpetually sullen, at least when Keisha was in the room. Occasionally in one-on-one meetings, I could still kid around with them or hear them chat among themselves about the mundane details of teenage life. Okay, that's not surprising. It's like when the bully doesn't show up to school, everyone is suddenly happier and relaxed and lighthearted, and then the bully returns and everybody's like back to like, God, oppressive and overbearing individual. As I was beginning the seminar, sitting on the grass in my backyard, Keisha interrupted. I think you should start with a lecture offering context for this reading and telling us the main points. I reminded the class of the seminar format, of the reasons for it, and the snippets of pedagogical theory we had read and discussed together, exploring the value of the seminar. Keisha insisted I needed to give a lecture immediately. Eventually, I acceded. There goes the problem. Why? To use the idiom du jour, my comment was triggering to Keisha. The jour is triggering. She launched into a long speech about how I was ignoring the demands of a Black woman and how I made the space unsafe. I think I found a new anti-heroine of my story for Black students. She then announced that she would take the students back to their house without eating the lunch I had waiting for them. It was clear to me the situation was getting out of control. You think, after the students left my house, I reached out to the Telluride Association to share my concerns. They promised to investigate. Late Sunday night, I was informed the students were too exhausted to have class on Monday. Tuesday morning, no one was in the seminar room. I waited 10 minutes and Keisha entered. She said the students had something to say to me. 10 more minutes of waiting in silence, then all 9 remaining students entered, each carrying a piece of paper. One of them, one by one, they read a paragraph. One of their mouths came everything Keisha had said to me during the urgent meeting she had with me after classes when students had allegedly been harmed. The students had all of the dogma of anti-racism, but no actual racism to call out in their world. And Keisha had channeled all the students' desire to combat racism at me. Oh dear God. Oh God. Yeah. So by this point, they were thoroughly brainwashed by Keisha. They allege I had used racist language. I had misgendered Brittany Griner. I had repeatedly confused the names of two Black students. My body language harmed them. My body language harm them. I hadn't corrected facts that were harmful to hear when the now purged students introduced them in class. I invited them to think about the reasoning of both sides of an argument when only one side was correct. The students ended with demand, in light of all the harms they had suffered, they could only continue the class if I abandoned the seminar format and instead lectured each day about anti-Blackness, correcting any of them who questioned orthodoxy. The only critical perspectives they were receiving during the summer, they claimed, were from Keisha. A white girl, the one with all the snails, punctuated their point. Keisha speaks for me. She says everything I think better than I could. Oh, not good. Keisha is uniquely talented at performing her role, but she isn't the author of the play. Pushing anti-racism to its limit, that which we reach isn't just hollow doctrine, but abuse, pathological relationships that cut us off from the world, from the give and take of reasons and feelings of unfolding over time that makes up life in the world. We see this crystal clear in the paradoxes that I encountered. The experience was supposed to be organized around a transformative justice rather than a punitive model, yet the community managed to expel 2 of its members. Students continually voiced their desire to find practical actions to help change the world, but after 4 weeks, they had learned to say that anti-Blackness is so foundational the world could never change. The students wanted freedom for themselves and for all, but they started to say that the only route to freedom is indoctrination, having me tell them what to think. Saddest of all for me was hearing that the Black students said they needed extra help. They were struggling to understand anything from the readings, and they couldn't even know what questions to ask unless they had guidance. First, Keisha said this, then the Black students said it, then their allies repeated it in solidarity with them. But I witnessed them learning. I heard them ask critical questions about difficult texts. I saw their writing improve. I saw them use complex concepts in thoughtful ways. They just didn't believe in themselves anymore because, yes, that's what wokeness does. It tells Black people that they're helpless. It takes away their agency and tells them that everything they do is the result of the evil white society. So he goes back to this too shy student, blah, blah, blah. As the weeks went by, fewer and fewer students turned in written reading responses. Fewer and fewer students showed up on time. They fell asleep in class and they would walk out for extended snack breaks in the middle of the school. The seminar can't be sustained at Telluride or in the university itself if we understand it as something you enter when you feel like it, stay in as long as your beliefs go unquestioned, and leave when you become uncomfortable. Okay, so in conclusion of this mess, I emailed the students and Keisha with the decision and with an offer to read and respond to any written work the students produced, because at this point they weren't showing up and I never heard back. No one sent written work, none indicated a desire to attend. So Keisha is an energy vampire. Attending a meeting where I would be a guest speaker. None would attend a meeting where I would be a guest speaker. The students had almost 2 weeks off. With the seminar canceled, did they go home? Did they tell their parents? Did Keisha lecture to them all day? I don't know. I had extricated myself from the abusive relationship, but 9 students remained captive. Belief in democracy had authorized abuse, and there was no way out. At least not for most of the students, but the 3 students who had left, 2 expelled and 1 who had visa problems, oh, they were the lucky ones, individually reached out to me. They wanted to do the readings, they wanted to write papers, they wanted to meet virtually and continue the seminar. So we continued a seminar in exile, reading the classics of Black thought, C.L.R. James, Charles Chestnut, Harriet Jacobs, James and Lee Boggs, Believers in Democracy, Fugitives from Democracy. Vincent Lloyd is a professor and director of the Center for Political Theology at Villanova University and author of Black Dignity, The Struggle Against Domination. So folks, what have we learned? Wokeness is toxic. This anti-racist stuff is toxic. It's used by people with authoritarian slants to bully those they don't like. The students who left were probably the good ones. They are the lucky ones. The others have become brainwashed. Can they be saved? We don't know. Anyway, I'm just going to leave you with that. Sorry this has been on too long. This is just ridiculous. And I know I want to see more from Professor Lloyd. I want to see him talk to James McWhorter, whom he quotes from here. I want to see if he's come around. There's still a lot to learn about, you know, history and anti-Black racism in the United States. But wokeness is not it. Critical race theory, anti-racist ideology, that's not it. That's a militant movement that does more harm than good. The irony. It's toxic, it's emotionally draining, and it contributes to no better society. Anyway, that's it, folks. Let me know what you think, because this was just one of the most absurd articles I've ever read.